Now, we studied that as a textbook. That is not a skinny little book that we have there. I mean, there's a lot of patriots in the American Revolution that we studied. Black patriots.
I read the book Giants and was just amazed at this man, Frederick Douglass. Incredible guy. We don't really even know. Most people can say, I think the audience would say, yeah, I can recognize, I know that's Frederick Douglass, but you're not really sure. He looks kind of just like a black Alexander Graham Bell. I mean, you're like, I don't really know his story, I think. Am I right saying that or not? You kind of know him, but you're not sure why.
Right.
Tell his story.
We've got a movie about Malcolm X, right? Movies about Martin Luther King Jr., and for some reason in American history we think that the only time blacks stood up for their rights was when Martin Luther King decided to leave the pulpit and hit the stump, hit the stump to make speeches. The bottom line is, for the longest time, we've adopted this victim narrative about blacks in the United States, that the only role they played was a victim to white majority oppression. When I teach my course on Black American politics, I always stress to my students that when we talk about King and the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, we need to call it the modern civil rights movement, because blacks from before the revolution were prudently pressing for their rights. American history could be described as one long civil rights struggle. Our first Emancipation Proclamation, Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
It's been this way. It's going on now. It's going on. It's people trying to grab others' rights, and that never changes. That's human history. That's human history. If I ask the audience, when did America have its first African American judge? What year would you say? Anybody? Take a guess. Judge. 1860s? Anybody? 1770. Amy, is that just a wild guess?
No, not. I wasn't sure exactly, but I think it's about
1770. Tell me.
1768. Wentworth Cheswell, New Hampshire, elected to office in New Hampshire. He was reelected for the next 49 years, held 8 different political positions. Really cool story about him is we all know that Paul Revere made his midnight ride. We also know he wasn't the only guy riding that night. Another guy riding, Wentworth Cheswell, black and white riding.
Now, how is it possible? Did you know that we had an African American ride to say the British are coming, the British are coming? Amy did. Amy did. Anybody else besides Amy know that? 2, 3. Okay, 3 people in the audience. He was such a great guy, and we never hear about him because he rode north and Paul Revere rode west. And Revere was going after Reverend Jonas Clark's church because that's where Hancock and Adams were, was him. And that's where we had blacks and whites, as you pointed out, laying on the ground after that battle. Wentworth Cheswell rode north telling people the British are coming. And it was from the north that all those people came to Boston to take on the British at Bunker Hill and everywhere else. So we don't hear about his ride because the British went west, and that's where all the action happened. But it was a couple of days later when all these people started coming down from New Hampshire and Vermont and elsewhere, and that's where he had ridden, telling them what was up. Lucas, when we come back, I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want you to tell me a little bit about about Frederick Douglass. Sure. You know, the opening of Giants is so captivating, where you see a man who has struggled, who was kept. I mean, it sounds horrible to say, but kept in, I guess, nice slavery, if there's such a thing. How would you describe how he...
Well, he didn't grow up as a slave in the deep South, the deep cotton states. So, I mean, the phrase being sold down the river, that has an actual historical connection. To be sold down the river was the worst thing because you went from something pretty bad to awfully bad.
Right, okay.
So a slave in Maryland is not as bad as being a slave down in the Delta.
And what happened to his family where he was originally held? Because they sold him.
They sold him. He never knew his siblings, met his mother, or had vague memories of his mother maybe a few times. He remembers her calling him my little Valentine, and that's why he dates his birthday February 14th, but he doesn't have a birth certificate. He doesn't know when he was born. Okay. We think February 1818.
Okay, so he was in, a slavery that was northern slavery. But then he was sold into horrible, horrible conditions, and he witnessed for the first time somebody's whipping him, and he's like, whoa, 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 what is this all about? And it wasn't too much longer that he's sitting and having a conversation with Abraham Lincoln because he was so impressive. We'll tell you that story coming up in just a second. Tonight, we are talking about the founders and the black founders, and I think Frederick Douglass is a refounder, and we need more refounders. There are black founders. There are people that were here and played instrumental roles in the American idea and experiment. To learn more about all the founders, go to glennbeck.com and sign up for Insider Extreme. Check out the rock stars of the revolution, the 5 things you didn't know about our black founding fathers. Available at glennbeck.com. Sign up for Extreme, and you get the documentaries and everything else that are part of that. All right, back with me now, David Barton, founder of and president of Wall Builders, and Lucas Morel. He is the professor at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. We're talking a little bit about Frederick Douglass, and I just want to, I would like the thrust of this show to be able to have African Americans watch this and say, oh, wait a minute, hang on, I haven't been told the truth. This is my country. There's such a disconnect prior to Abraham Lincoln. It's like the country for African Americans maybe was founded here, but that's not true. We have a man who was born in slavery, didn't know his family, horrible life, sold to another family. He's being whipped, and he doesn't even understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if you can fill in any of the blanks. He doesn't even understand it. He's like, what are you doing? And whip him, whip him, whip him, try to break him. He runs away. He's sent back. Now they whip him within an inch of his life. He finally actually breaks the master, if I'm not mistaken.
The slave breaker, right.
Right, yeah. I think he's sold to another family where he finally is emancipated. Is that, I'm trying to remember this.
Well, he escapes for a second time. You're right. He tried to escape in 1836, I believe, and was caught in prison for a while, sent back, and then 2 years later just decides to try it again, rather die fighting for his freedom than to continue living as a slave, and he succeeds in 1838.
Now, how does he, where does he go from there? How does he make this transition from slave to
Here's a fellow who he gets in close with the Anti-Slavery Association, the American Anti-Slavery Society, and becomes a lecturer. And the story about that is his English is so good, people start saying there's no way Frederick Douglass could have been a slave because he speaks the King's English. I mean, it's so eloquent. He publishes his very famous now narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, in 1845 to rave reviews, has to flee the country because he names names, his masters. What he doesn't do is he names the whites who helped him, because he wants to continue the Underground Railroad, as it were, for it to be successful. In fact, he's very critical of those who've been bragging about how they got out in this and that way. And he's like, look, you're not doing your brothers a favor here. So he has to flee to England, goes on tour there for 2 years, and it's British friends of his, with maybe a few Americans, who pay for him to be free so that he can return to the United States in 1847.
Okay, so he comes back. He takes a trip to Washington, D.C. I think he meets a general. I'm sorry, I'm so fuzzy on some of these details. I meant to brush up before I went on, and so I'm pulling this out of my memory here. But he goes to Washington. I think he meets a general, and the general is so impressed with him, says, you should serve. You should serve. And he says, absolutely, which was, if I'm not mistaken, unheard of at the time. And the general is so impressed, he says, you need to meet the president. And he walks him to the White House, where he sits and they talk for 3 hours, and they become friends.
This is the summer, this is August of 1863, the year of Jubilee, right? Emancipation, January 1st, 1863. He's there to complain to the president. He's one of Lincoln's fiercest critics, although a supporter, but one keeping Lincoln honest here. Now that he's got freedmen and free blacks serving in the Union Army and the Navy. He wants them to have equal pay. He wants them to be treated equally, get all the same treatment that white soldiers get. And Lincoln explains to him, look, we're just barely getting the country used to the idea of blacks serving in the military, let alone paying them equally. He makes the governor of Connecticut wait out in the hall. Twice they come in and say, Mr. President, the governor of Connecticut is out here, and he says, I want to talk to my friend Frederick Douglass here. Meets with Douglass next year, August of '64. What's happening then? The war going very poorly. Lincoln, on record, does not believe he's going to be reelected. So why is he meeting with Frederick Douglass? Not just Frederick Douglass, but a second meeting, another meeting with Martin Delany, another black intellectual.